The condition of iconicity is related to the unlimited. If the case, in our case, the iconicity of houses means the relation between these houses and modernity or modernization, of course they are infinite kind of icons that could be related to modernization or modernism. But the case of the canon is different because the canon is related to limits, and the canon, we all know, is determined by institutions. We need to teach people literature, so we need to decide how many books and which books we will be teaching and they will have to read. Or we need to include in a UNESCO list buildings, but they could not be all the buildings in the world. You have to choose some buildings, some houses in this case. So the determination of the canonic is in contrast with the undetermination of the iconic. I have to be canonic because I have a limit in time. So I cannot present all the iconic houses in Latin America. I have to refer to some canonic houses in Latin America, probably. And this is what I will try to do now. I choose 5 or 6 meaningful houses, and I try to be equilibrated in the territory and related to the different countries. Of course, I cannot mention in this restricted time all the countries, all the good examples we have. But let's start by this one in Brazil, which is the house Warszawski-Klawin by Gregory Warszawski. You see there, of course, this one is in black and white, is Gregory Warszawski, and he is with Lucio Costa and Frank Lloyd Wright, and at one of his houses in Rio de Janeiro in 1931. Warszawski was Russian. He went to Italy to study, and then from Italy he decided to marry Mina Klawin and go to Sao Paulo, and he stayed there until the end of his life. When he arrived there and married Mina, who was a rich woman, or at least from a rich family, they decided to build a house very early in the late 20s, and this was the house. And I like it, and I think it's really very expressive of some of the characteristics of modern architecture in Latin America, because it's a rare fusion between ideas that come from the main hegemonic or main theories of modernism. That is easy to see, but at the same time, as we can see in the plans here, there, in that plans, the house has 2 faces. One face is clearly something Laosian, we could say, but on the other side, totally different, it becomes regional. So it's a fusion of these 2 things, but at the same time, there is another characteristic that I like from this house. The internal space is very rich, and but the other thing is the introduction and the importance of vegetation and local kind of vegetation that was introduced by Mina because she was a landscape architect, and since that moment the Warszawski houses and many other, I would say many buildings, modern buildings in Brazil started to include and to take into consideration the importance of landscape and the importance of vegetation in its articulation with architecture. Something that happens also in art. Nowadays there is a beautiful, extraordinary exhibition of Tarsila do Amaral from Brazil at the MoMA, and you could see there this kind of fusion I'm talking about, the fusion between some traits of modernity and at the same time this looking for local kind of characteristics in terms of climate, but also in terms of tradition. This is another case, the second case I choose, which is 1928 Montevideo, totally different in a way. Here, this is Julio Villamajo, the architect, This scene is a moment in the construction or the debates for the construction of the United Nations building in New York. And he was one of the person, the architects in that team. You remember in that team they were almost 10 people, and 2 of them were from Latin America. One was Vilamajo, and the other one was Oscar Niemeyer. So it was an important moment, and he, as you can see there, if Oscar was very young, I think it was less than 40 when he took part of this enormous commitment. Vilamajo was not very young. He was in the top of his career, and in fact he was an important master for Uruguayans, and I think also for Argentinians and for many other Latin Americans. Here the fusion is different. Here the fusion is between modern architecture and academia. He had Montevideo has an extraordinary tradition, academic tradition, very pure, following the rules of the academic schools, mainly in France, of course in Paris. And he teaches that, and he was very engaged with this idea. So the house he built for himself in that moment, 1928, in a way has these 2 phases also. The reason I choose is because it's extremely rich. At the same time, its space is extremely interesting, interior space, but not just interior space. Also, the exterior is extremely rich, and at the same time, there is an attempt. There is an attempt to include some elements that also will be part of in the future of many buildings in Latin America, which are I will show you some elements in the facade. You can see the articulation of the volume from the exterior, but and these are the elements he was adding to the walls, which were created by an artist, and which refer in a way to the condition of a harbor city like Montevideo, and something that was important for him and also for many buildings that were built in the late 20s in Montevideo that are referential in regards to the harbor. And those are the plans. You see that it's a very small plan, like a tower, built around this the staircase, and in each one of the levels you find a different function. But this, what happens, it could be too less probably when you see the way it's developed in space. It's really extraordinary. These gardens growing with the volume. It's not just the vertical plant, but also the horizontal plants, which are here important. This water mirror and the staircase, the exterior staircase, and then the tree and the vegetation included there, like in that part of the garden. So the exterior is almost an interior, and is treated as an interior. No, this space lacks for a roof, but in a way it's an interior space. No. Protected and related to the city and to the environment. And this is the interior. As you can see, of course, those are different pictures, but this small space is really extremely delicate and at the same time very well designed and composed, with many different elements using this treatment of the column, for instance, which was, we have to remember, not so frequent also in some pieces of architecture in that moment in the world. I mean, the late 1928. And also what is important is the treatment of materials, as I was saying, and the furniture, etc. Nowadays, fortunately, this house is on the hands of the School of Architecture in Montevideo, so it's a foundation, and it's very well conserved and maintained. Then this one, 1931, I'm going chronologically. 1931, This probably is a more known example, of course, by Juan O'Gorman. And here in the picture we have the young, very young Juan O'Gorman with Diego Rivera. And of course, this is the house of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo in Mexico City. And you see somehow the house. But what is shocking for me, at least, is how young was O'Gorman when he did this house, which was so foundational, so important for the history of architecture and houses in Latin America, and I think in the world. And I will try to show you why. This is the house, probably you know. For those of you that you don't know, guess which is the house for Diego and which is the house for Frida. Of course, that one, the smaller, is for Frida, and the biggest is for Diego. But what is interesting here is to see. Of course, there is a reference, a clear reference here, which is that one. This is aux enfants atelier in Paris by Le Corbusier. And many people say, yes, it's a reproduction of the aux enfants atelier. But it's not. First reason, because the house is not one house, it's two houses, unified by a bridge. So it's not. It's very rare, this kind of communication. I don't know. I asked myself if it had to do with the relation between Frida and Diego. I don't know. But anyway, this is totally different, but not just for that reason. If you can see there, if you see the facades in Le Corbusier are composed facades, are equilibrated facades, are regulated by regulation, geometry, etc., classical geometry, harmony, blah, blah, blah. But in the case of look at this facade, the one for Frida, for instance. In the case of O'Gorman, he hated that. He hated this kind of tradition. He wanted really a minimum, totally, radically minimum expenditure for the house and for the architecture. Of course, you know that Diego Rivera was a Trotskyist. Well, he was a Marxist, communist, and Trotskyist in particular. So he was extremely radical, and he wanted for his house, not the whole thing wanted to be very rough and cheap in a sense, to express his commitment with the proletariat. But at the same time, he wanted himself to be represented as a worker. So this is why for him was so important the shed roof, because this should be a fabric, an industry to create art, and not just an atelier for inspirational artists. So those are some. Though there are some other very well-known characteristics, like the fence, which is made by cactus, and something more that I would like to add, which is the color. The color. Because some people believe that the uses of color started in the 60s, probably with Luis Barragán or this. No, there is a tradition, and even in this very radical house from the 20s, from early 30s, if you want, the use of color was important. So it was part of a very long tradition that affected even the radical example. And the other thing is this one. You see the interiors, and you see the exposed bricks there, and the exposed concrete. When brutalism started, I ask? In the 60s, or perhaps in 1931, in Mexico City, for instance. Because the use of materials here is absolutely original, in a sense. We can refer to Perret, perhaps, but not with this kind of radicality, like we can see here, not just in the way he treated the ceiling or the roof, but also the way he treated the wires, for instance, or the handrails there. So everything was something that could be bought in a shop and used there. So do we need to wait the yields to do that operation, or perhaps was it here also? Okay, this is 1931. 1950, this is also a very famous house by Oscar Niemeyer, which is there sitting into his house with his wife. The house is located in the suburb of Rio de Janeiro. And here we have something different. Okay, again, this is the house, this is the plan of the house. And for me, what is relevant is I would say, a sort of attempt of ironic dialogue between Niemeyer and some masters or some hegemonic ideas in modern architecture. I think the house, of course, has the main traits are the shape, the biomorphic shape of the roof and the whole house, but mainly the roof. The rock, which is located there, entering the house, and the relation of the house between the landscape, Niemeyer wanted there, to express his will to communicate to give the possibility to see the sea on one side, and on the other side it's surrounded by the beautiful forest in characteristic of the Morros in Rio. But I think that it's this pavilion, which has to do with our glass pavilion from yesterday, because it's a glass pavilion in a park. It's the same program. But at the same time when I say it's ironic, it's because he treats, this is more or less the house, the exterior, you see the contortion of the roof, the rock and the swimming pool, and the landscape, as I was saying, in relation with the sea, and how, and this is the back of the house. In the model, you can see the back of the house. Because there is a characteristic, which is that the fact that the house has one level, the ground level, which is the most important space we are seeing there. It's really a weekend house. It's very, very small. And the dorms are downstairs in the basement. So I like here the references, Niemeyer references, because there are many. For instance, here is right. Of course, he's referring to the presence of the existing rocks in falling water. We know about that, but this is an existing rock also in canoas. And more than that, I like this reference, because when I say this, it's an irony. It is. This is the Barcelona Pavilion, and this is the house. The location of the sculpture in relation with the water and with the house and with the glass is the same. What is different is the treatment. And it's like he was joking with that. And it could be. Look at the plan. This is Tugendhat. Oh, again. This is Tugendhat. And this is canoas. You see the place for the dinner, and they are the place of the dinner. And in the section, you see the section in Tugendhat, but in Tugendhat you enter from the door, the dorms, and then you go down for the living room, from the main space. Here you enter for the living space, and then you go down for the dorms. So those are some operations he did, and I think he also was a communist. He also was a communist, and he thought that the real modern architecture will start in Brazil once the working class will take power. But in the meantime, what can the architects do? And he said, in a way, to enjoy the possibilities of using cheap workers or using concrete, or not being engaged, because nothing real serious could be done into a capitalist society. So I think he was joking with these principles, so serious principles, coming from Austria or from Germany or from Switzerland, which were things to play with in Brazil. Of course, he will receive a punition, because after building this house in 1954, Brazil received a visit of people like Gropius, Max Peel, and others, who, since that moment on, started to say, those are children, those are not serious people, and the admiration for the Brazilian architecture started to have an end after the house. They visited the house. And I think they understood perfectly the idea that was in that house. Then Antonio Bonet, 1953. Antonio Bonet is the Ox House in Buenos Aires. Antonio Bonet was a Spaniard. He came from Catalonia, from Barcelona. He had relatives in Buenos Aires. He was working with José Luis Sert in the construction. He was helping Sert in the construction of the Spanish pavilion at the 1937 exhibition in Paris, so the one where the Guernica was exhibited. In fact, this Spanish pavilion was a box to receive the Guernica, Picasso's Guernica. And Bonet was a very young man, and here we have Bonet participating of at the Patris, the navigation of the Congress of Siam that ended with the Charter of Athens. And I think the other one is Alto. So he was really very engaged since the beginning, since a very young, being a very young person. He went to Paris. He met in Paris Corbusier, of course. He wanted to work with Le Corbusier. And at the atelier, at the Corbusier's atelier, he met two people from Buenos Aires, Juan Kurchan and Jorge Ferrari Ardoy. For most of you, there is a famous chair called butterfly chair. Okay, the news is that this is not the butterfly chair, but this is the BKF, because it was created by Bonet and Kurchan and Ferrari, and this is why they call them it the BKF and not butterfly chair. And he was one of the designers when he arrived to Buenos Aires, and they built the atelier. Natasha visited when she was there. And for this atelier, the furniture was, part of the furniture was this chair. So we have him in Buenos Aires. He stayed for a long time in Buenos Aires, and then he went back, I think in the early 60s, no? Was it? Early 60s, went back to Spain. Meanwhile, he built a lot in Argentina, and I choose one house, which is this one, the Ox House, in 1953, which is it's a wonderful house, determined by this idea of a grid in the space, a 3D grid in the space, and the whole walls and the whole levels are determined by this grid, using this steel structure and creating these different characteristics of spaces, like this one, that one to go up to the first floor, or this one to go across the side, because there is another pavilion in the back of the site. And probably it has to do with this kind of previous examples, or this kind of experiments with the 3D grid, and probably this was the intention, Bonet's intention, to put in practice in order to control, if you want, the composition of a house in space. And those are some of the views. This is the back of the house, and here are the plans. You can see the structure of the house. And the last example I wanted to show you is this one, which is the Geraci House in Sao Paulo in Brazil, 1988. Why? Because it's strongly related to something that we examined at the exhibition, which is the idea of development. So here the question for Paulo Mendes and for Antonio Geraci, who was the engineer who asked him for the house, the idea was to build a house with the technology, with the very advanced in a sense, but not usually applied to this kind of building, the technology for building roads, bridges in roads, etc. And so the whole house is prefab. The whole house is prefab. They fabricated the big elements in concrete in an industry, and then they with trucks they transported these elements to the site. All the house was built in that way, which is fantastic. And this is the scheme. So this is the bridge. This is a drawing by Paulo Mendes, and the scheme of the house, which is so elementary. It's really, again, something simple. But I like it because it's so simple. And at the same time, it's referring to not to all kind of technologies and not to necessarily to very sophisticated technology, but to something so frequent, like is the technology to build bridges and roads. And you see the plan. He had these few columns or supports, and then the ground floor is free, not totally free because you see the swimming pool entering in this shadow sector of the terrain. So it's said by some people that the engineer wanted to recreate the shadowy situation that he experimented when he was under a bridge in the walking in the road. And this is what is created here. Even the staircase was prefab and transported with a truck. So all the elements were done in that way. And then they added the walls in the interior. And the interior also is fantastic because it's like a pantheon, no? Like the pantheon. It's organized around this hole here, the central hole. I will show you. And it's simple that. It's like a patio, but in the second floor, like you say here, or the elevated floor. And this is the house, this is the staircase, and you see the ground floor, and the union of this part is so brutal in a way, really, but at the same time so delicate. It's not brutalism in the sense similar to the unité d'habitation, for instance. Nothing to do. This is a very industrialized kind of use of concrete. It's not the same thing. And you see the different elements that compose the house, and this is a grid which allows water when it rains. If they open this oculum, like in the Pantheon, you see the grid there. The rain could cross the house and go down, and you see the floor, even the floor. The floor is the floor of a patio. It's not the floor, an interior floor. It's an exterior one. So this, and the protection, etc. So it's extremely simple and extremely sophisticated on the other side. And let me conclude with this epilogue with interrogations. Because coming back to the question of canonic or iconic, what kind of other examples or other references could we include if we follow the idea of iconic? For instance, the bizarres. They are examples like this one. This is Carlos Baez Villaró. He's an Uruguayan. He's a painter. He was, until a couple of years ago, a painter. And he created this Casa Pueblo, Pueblo house, in Uruguay, in a beach, beautiful place in Uruguay, which started like his house. But then the house growth and growth and growth and growth, and nowadays it's a resort. So, and nowadays this thing, of course it's iconic. Is it canonic? I don't know. Those are interrogations, just that. This is another one. This is Flavio de Carvalho, an extraordinary Brazilian figure, extraordinary, and very ignored in a way, very ignored. And this is this person who was an artist, who created this dressing, and he was a writer, he was a theater director, he was an architect, he was a painter, he was everything. And he was crazy. Crazy, yeah. he was crazy. But at the same time, he did this for his own house in, see, 1929-38. What is this? A mastaba, but look at this. It's not just a mastaba. And look at the plan. Well, look at the interior. So what is this? Is it iconic? Is it canonic? Another example of this kind of thing, but they are not the only ones. I mean, I'm trying to really interrogate, to create a problem. Where are the limits? Where are the limits? And I like it. I like these houses. It's not that I don't appreciate it. I think we need to find new ways of understanding and values. This is another one by Eduardo Longo from the 70s, also in Brazil. There are many crazy people in Brazil. And this is the Casa Bola in Sao Paulo. Which is, we laugh, but it's serious. He believed in that. He proposed this house to be an element for creating a city, and he made drawings for that. So it's something serious. It had to do with the 70s, of course. But he built it. So it exists in Sao Paulo. Then second group, unrhetoricals. People who doesn't want to say something, but are great architects. Carlos Raúl Villanueva is probably one of the greatest architects in the 20th century at all. Of course, the best architect in Venezuela and one of the best architects in Latin America. He was the author of the University City in Caracas, which is a monument of humanity, and it's an enormous piece of work and enormous piece of architecture. But this is his house. So in his house, he didn't want to be Carlos Raúl Villanueva and with a signature. So he wanted a house. I remember once was Carlos Carpa was asked about what was his cemetery. And he said, è un bel posto per andare a mangiare pane e salame. And it's a good place to go to eat some bread and salami. So I think this is a house to eat a good, probably fish from the Caribbean or something, translating pane e salami for Villanueva. And it's nothing more than that, but at the same time, it's a gallery. Villanueva controlled all the places for the painters and the pieces of art he had. He was a great collector of contemporary abstract art. So, but the house is this. This is the exterior. This is his place to work, like a small elongated cabanon. And this is the house, which is beautiful at the same time. And we have to think, and I think that a great architect like him perhaps not wanted to say something, to be expressive, at the same time had everything under control. So I think, again, we need to have new values to interpret this and not let us exclusively be addressed to the big discourses. And then the ephemerals. And here I come back to a problem also. The ephemeral is a condition of modernity. I mean, destruction is a condition of modernity. At the same time, the ephemeral is the condition of our life. We are ephemeral. So I'm saying this because preservation has to do with death, with ephemeral, etc. So what can we do with that? Many buildings, like this enormous piece of architecture, the Juan O'Gorman house from 1952, were destroyed. This was destroyed. This other house by Clorindo Testa in Buenos Aires was recently destroyed, demolished, which is an extraordinary piece of architecture from the 70s by one of the best architects in Latin America, and probably with world stature. And this is the house. So I think that the people who more radically presented this question, again, around the idea of iconic or canonic, etc., were these people in Chile. The cooperative Amereida, they were Heideggerians. They were a group from the School of Architecture in Valparaiso. We decided in the 70s to create a city, which they call Ciudad Abierta, the open city. But this city here, architecture was not something just for architects. Alberto Cruz, this one, was an architect, but this one, Wilfredo Guillaume, was a poet. So, like as Heideggerians, they believed in the capacity of poetry to open new doors for the understanding of the existence. So they created his pieces of architecture as facts as a result of poetical acts. And this was one of the poetical acts upon the sea and the shore. The place is located, you see the sea there, and this is, those are the buildings of the Ciudad Abierta, and this is the sea. They are dunes there, big dunes. And one of them, one of the buildings, this one, called Hospedería del Paraíso, Hospedería del Banquete. Hospedería is a very difficult, is a very Heideggerian kind of word, really. It means, it has to do with receiving and hosting. They don't talk at all about houses here. They talk about hospederías. They live there, and the function is to receive people who come and desire, wish to stay and to have a relationship, etc., etc. But at the same time, the whole open city is an experiment by the school. So they live there for a certain amount of time, but not for the whole life. It's not for eternity. It's part of the definition of the buildings here is the condition of being ephemeral, and to be there until the moment when they will die as buildings. And I remember that two big figures like Marinetti or even Schroeder, they believed that the houses, the modern houses, should live just no more than one generation. For the famous Schroeder house, he said, I think it has to be destroyed in 50 years, no more than that. So, and they believe in that, and those are created in this way, and they are putting us questions, I think, also in this sense. And okay, this is the materials they use are so simple, so ephemeral, as I was saying. So I think this is all I had to say for this morning. I think it's enough. Thank you very much. Perhaps we had some minutes for questions. 8 minutes. Okay. I don't know.
Do you think that the periphery has permission to do these non-hegemonic things?
Define periphery. This is no. It seems a joke, but it's not. I think there is a the idea of periphery has to do with the idea of center. But in our civilization, centers and peripheries are continuously moving. So sometimes one center becomes periphery or semi-periphery, and in another time it's a center again or periphery. And a periphery becomes a center. I don't know. Look at China. So I don't know. I think that even this game between center and periphery. Of course, I believe that they are hegemonic centers, momentaneous hegemonic centers. But I think that the game between these momentaneous hegemonic centers and their peripheries is everywhere, in every level, in every activity, and in every place in the world. So they are internal peripheries. I could say that some neighborhoods in Los Angeles are peripheries, and they should be in the architects there, like Gehry, for instance, could be in that condition. So it's relative.
I would ask, would you say that the was talking about periphery and center, and you were talking about the mobility. Do you think? And yesterday we attended a presentation about Philip Johnson, and the critics and historians from the United States, they put the first regards on Latin America, on modern architecture of Latin America. It was from North America, that they look down there instead of Europe. Really, if they were Europeans that came to Latin America to work and to be in partnership with Latin American architects, the Americans started to come after the critics, and the historians have posed their view on Latin American architecture. And innovative and modern.
After Hitchcock.
Yes. Would you say that it was this connection of the regard of the critics and historians of the United States that put into the international seal this architecture you were showing? In the 40s.
Of course, yes. I think that this is what I refer when I say I talk about hegemonic centers. Take Brazil. I wrote some paper on this case. Brazil started to be important and considered as a big center for modern architecture after the exhibition at MoMA. It was the idea, in my opinion, the idea of Brazilian architecture, not modern architecture in Brazil, but Brazilian architecture, was created by MoMA in 1943. Because many reasons. I can give you the address of this paper. But so of course, this was, and we are talking about material possibilities. And I am grateful because without this material possibility of MoMA, for instance, we could not make the exhibition. Mm-hmm. You know, when it was because any country in Latin America could organize that exhibition. Because but you come from Argentina here to Venezuela to ask for the plans. No, why? These are from Venezuela, etc. The doors were closed, but we had the card of MoMA. So when we went to Lima or to Ecuador or whatever to look for things, we have the card of MoMA, and everybody say yes, sir, and gave us everything. So we were good people, but sometimes in that position they are not good people. So. But it's extremely important. Probably the best library, the best library for Latin American architecture is located in New York, probably at Avery in Colombia and at GSD. Mm-hmm. So, of course, and this is material. We are talking about materiality, things, money, power. And I believe that. But of course, fortunately, even that is in movement and changing and reaccommodating, and it's not so easy, not so simple, but it exists, of course.
Yeah, this is a connection.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned the last exhibition of MoMA.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. We were the good guys.
Of the exhibition of the Brazilians.
Yeah, the Brazilian and Hitchcock, Latin American by Hitchcock, of course.
From the examples you chose, I got the impression that Latin American architects chose the European, German, French architects of the 1920s as a kind of reference, but at the same time, if it comes to brutalism or if it comes to these elements, they are a bit ahead of time from the European perspective. Is that true? Or
the constructivism in Valparaiso started at in the early 70s, before the constructivism in the world. So I think that this kind of relation, I don't like, first thing, I don't like the idea of Latin American architecture. I like to talk about architecture in Latin America. And when we start to understand this question, so we can expand the problem. I mean, influences, relationship. We live in modern times, so relationships are everywhere. Is Terragni influenced by Le Corbusier? Of course. Is Terragni not Terragni? Of course not. Terragni is Terragni. I mean, and this happens everywhere. Is Le Corbusier alone, or he is looking to Switzerland or Germany, learning from Peter Behrens, and his group, take this example, is Gropius alone? Well, when he wrote for the Werkbund, for the magazine, Werkbund magazine, an article on the modern industrial architecture, he mentioned silos in America, this part of America and the southern part of America. So the examples he presented as lessons for German architects were taken from America. So these relationships are universal and are part of this network of centers, moving centers, moving peripheries, etc., in the whole world. This is my impression.
And also the nomadic architects of the 20th century, because this is the period of the history of architecture, that the architects and people move around as much as in no previous times. You know, there were the Europeans coming to Latin America, coming back, staying. Some others, they were in partnership with Latin American, then the Americans and so on. So this was part of the game, isn't it?
So, sorry. Yes, that's yeah. If I could say something about the effect of the Second World War in the relations between Latin America and the U.S. and Europe, and of course they were extremely important. For instance, these two young architects who were with Le Corbusier when Bonnet met them, etc., in 1938, were part of the last university community group of architects that organized their European trip before the war. After that, this was the last one. After that, during the war, the trip started to be from south to north. And then the relationship between South and North were enhanced, and then this during the war, and after the war, the United States were the most important country in the world. So after that, everything changed also, I would say there is even an accusation against some people in some architects in Latin America who were extraordinary architects, but they were accused and continues to be accused by many people, historians and critics, of not being enough Latin Americans. I hate the idea of being Latin American. I hate it. They were doing what they believed that techniques, like in everywhere, techniques were important, technology was important to the process of development. Why don't you use the same language and the same preference for the new technologies like it was happening everywhere, and mainly, as we are seeing here, in the United States? So then, in the 80s, after the different cracks in the middle 70s, the situation started to change. But all this period is, this was a characteristic which depended from the changes after the Second World War.
I have
Many modern architects were Marxists, many of them, probably mainly in Brazil. So, Oscar Niemeyer, Milano Artigas, Pablo Mendes de Rocha, Lina Bobardi, all were people related to Marxism and different forms of communist ideas. It depends on the moment, and they were artists, other architects coming from Europe, probably more related to social democratic kind of thinking. It depended on the moment. It's not, I try to show the way, for instance, Niemeyer understood, this is my opinion, he understood to be communist in a non-communist country, to be a communist architect in a non-communist country. He will not repeat what's happening in other places, but not for not copying. But I insist in the idea of playing an ironic game with these rules. These were, quote unquote, capitalist rules. He didn't believe in that. He had to wait for communism. What to do? And he was a genius. What to do? So I think the answers were different many times. In other cases, no. In other cases, they were people not necessarily. Not everybody was communist. Not. There were many people related to probably corporations or having a similar way of approaching, like the case of Philip Johnson and his group. So, yeah, it's relative. There are many possibilities, but they were present, and the flexibility. Even here, we have to remember that in the end, Diego Rivera was fired. So the flexibility was relative. We are flexible and we are open until Lenin.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.